Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chair this debate, which is now giving the floor to the patient voice and what should IMI keep in mind when designing a public-private partnership oncology program. So we have Fabien Calvo, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of Cancer Core Europe, Bettina Hill, founder of Melanoma Patient Network Europe, and Jan Gessler, director of the European Patient Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. Each of the three of them will make a short presentation, and then we will have a debate opening to the floor. What I would like to do first is to ask in the room how many are patient or patient representative, just to know to whom are we addressing. None. This is unbelievable. Okay, so I would give the floor first to Bettina, woman first.
Thank you very much for that. And quickly as background, by training I'm an MD, PhD. I have founded the Melanoma Patient Network Europe after losing my husband to the disease in 2012. And I'm currently the chair of the ESMO Patient Advocacy Working Group. So today this workshop is supposed to inform future IMI projects, and you all have the agenda in front of you, to bring the most value in moving forward the oncology innovation agenda. So from my perspective as a patient advocate, as someone personally affected by cancer, I'm interested in outcomes. What I care about is see our people live. And I see a big disjunction about the current discussion about innovation and outcomes for patients. And I'm interested in that space in between that really ensures that we get the outcomes that are relevant to our audience. And I think of this as user-led innovation, and we actually had already quite some detailed talks this morning, for example, from Denis on longitudinal follow-up, because I think that's a very important component in understanding how we really come to optimal outcomes in the end. Combined data sets to what Lex described in their great initiative, where we are able to merge data sets from different initiatives. A different point that was now just the previous speaker just alluded to is that we live in a real world. Our patients are real people. They are not idealized tribe populations. So I would like to see a focus. How do we really solve the real world problem and move away from an idealized hypothetical scientific construct to something that lets people on the ground live? For me, this actually leads to personalized or precision medicine. For me, it's, well, apart from being a hype word and buzzed about, I think personalized medicine is the consequence of that and should not be pushed around as a goal as such. We should consider it a tool to optimize outcomes for patients. And as a second big topic, and that has been alluded to this morning already, for me, healthcare innovation is outcomes for patients. A new drug is a mere invention, because if that drug sits on a shelf and does not get to the patients on the ground, it has no impact. The only exception being reserve antibiotics for multi-resistant bacteria. But I couldn't come up with any other drug that we would like to be seeing sitting on a shelf. So what we need is accessible products that deliver healthcare innovation, namely results for the European patient population. I believe that the current discussion is a bit too limited on drug prices right now. We all know that drug prices have a problem, but at the same time we also need new drugs. So I think we have to start thinking about a sustainable healthcare innovation system that delivers us both drugs that we need for our patients to live, but at a price that our healthcare systems afford. In my mind, it's a problem of misalignment of incentives in the underlying system. It's not just linked to prices. So I would like to see more discussion stimulate, and I hope IMI can provide a platform for that, how we can align our incentive system with what we are actually able to afford and what we want to deliver.
Thank you. Jan?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much. So just about me, I'm a cancer survivor. I've had cancer for the last 15 years. I've been in phase 2 from 1 to combined clinical trials for quite a while. And I've made all my way from being someone who studied business to someone who really tried to understand research to someone who's been working with researchers and patient advocates for the last 14 years to really make sure that research meets the needs of patients. And that's probably my, let's say my hobby, my biggest wish, that patients are involved in research more and more. When we talk about personalized medicine, I mean, the topic of the panel is really what should IMI keep in mind when designing a public-private partnership oncology program. So just complementing what Bettina has said, so what can IMI do and what is IMI for us? And if we go back and say, what is this whole discussion about integrated, dynamic, personalized cancer care like we had? I mean, it means, like Bettina was saying, it needs to arrive at the patient, on the average patient. We heard earlier on that every second European will get cancer during their life. I mean, the whole breakthrough will only work if most of them can actually access what we're inventing here. And I think IMI can be a perfect platform for this, because other than many other platforms, this is the place where industry meets academia, meets patient organizations, meets regulators, and we can work on a pre-competitive basis on a very, let's say, well-established platform to actually achieve that. And I think that's quite unique. And when, I mean, I'm not only a cancer patient, but I'm also the coordinator of an IMI1 project called the European Patients Academy. I firsthand experienced how different this is to some Horizon 2020 projects I've been involved in, and also to what, let's say, is being proposed in terms of patient involvement in the US, because they're looking quite anxiously to what IMI is doing over here, because this is really a platform where you can work together without constantly being accused about the, let's say, relationship between industry, patients, academia, and so on, because IMI has quite a rock-solid framework to make that happen. But thinking about what can IMI do, and I really like the picture from Stefan in the beginning with the silos for farmers, not for pharma. We cannot work in silos, and probably what has changed over the past couple of years, also maybe thanks to IMI and to EU Party, is that we're now there also from the patient side to professionally engage with researchers to make sure whatever is being researched will be focused on patient needs and will actually also arrive in the patient community in the very end. And what IMI can do is actually involve patients in that process. And I mean, that happens, let's say, in some of the consortia. In EU Party, we have even been consortium leaders. But so far, there's no systematic involvement yet. We're quite often asked to be advisors. We're quite often asked to be experts in these kind of projects. But I think we need to think, when we redefine or define an oncology program in IMI, we need to rethink how we do that systematically. So when the call texts are being written at the moment, patients are not being involved, might be a systematic issue that industry drafts the call texts, but we need to rethink, especially on calls which are really focused on patient viewpoints and patient issues. We need to have patients or patient representatives in the assessment panels that actually look at the applications, and we should put in the call text that patients should, or patient organizations should be involved in the consortia, not only in advisory boards and in expert groups and so on. They need to be part of the budget, because we cannot afford to provide our volunteer advice. We're quite often the only unpaid persons in the room in all these consortia, so we need to think that parts of the budget need to be dedicated to the patient advocacy work in these projects. And of course, we need to have then the patients in the consortia. And finally, also what is quite important to us, because it has really changed. We're doing our own research. We're doing patient-generated evidence ourselves. We need to have access to the data, not only those that are actually in academic centers. Quite often the data that's being generated in these projects is important to us, and we can also be data providers into these kind of big data things. And that's why, for example, my patient organization is also involved in the Harmony project, which was presented today as well. We're going to be channeling patient input from different pan-European umbrella organizations into Harmony to make sure whatever myeloma, lymphoma, or whatever disease is being covered in hematology in there, that we have the pan-European umbrella organizations to provide patient input into that, and also challenge the project in terms of outcomes for patients. So finally, so what can we do? I mean, we have very educated patient advocates, and we have very sophisticated pan-European umbrella networks in cancer. This is different to 10 years ago, where patient advocacy barely existed over here. We have groups like Melanoma Patients Europe, which is, let's say, extremely focused also on research and innovation. And likewise, we have 20 other pan-European networks. And when, again, coming back to the question, what can IMI do? It is important these umbrella networks are part of that. It doesn't help if we get one umbrella organization in such a project. We need to get these patient advocates in the projects that understand what they're doing, that understand what research is about, that are in touch with the researchers in the fields. So really the people that are working with researchers in melanoma, in CML, in myeloma, in whatever, because they will provide factual input into that. And we need less probably the policy perspective that the pan-European umbrellas have here in Brussels. So that needs a mechanism, because of course patient organizations are often volunteer-based. They don't have much staff, so they can't fully cope with the overhead of a European project if they all need to do all these kind of reportings and so on. So we need to think about a smart mechanism, and we're trying to test that in the Harmony project by having one patient organization in there, which is the hub for the whole patient community. So that's what we're trying to do. I must say it's been a pleasure with EU Party to work with IMI over the past years, and especially with the consortium. And I think it can be kind of role model. We're happy to share all the experience we had, like you Biopred did, and like in Get Real it's happening at the moment, to share how we are working with all the stakeholders through an IMI program. And I'm happy to share that also moving forward when an oncology program is being set up in IMI.
You are going to tell us what is Cancer Corps doing for patients or with patients?
We're doing a lot, I hope. And not only Cancer Corps Europe, but I am also sharing the International Cancer Genome Consortium for Medicine scientific board. And I would like to give you, to be more specific about metastatic cancer. You know that about 50% of patients are cured with their disease, but at least half of these numbers will have metastases and relapses, and ultimately will die of their cancer. So this is a major clue for us. I mean, to progress and to try to cure these patients. And using genomics and the current biology of 100 patients with cancer, which are analyzed, we can say that about 60 of them will have a driver alteration. That means it's found in 60% of cases, and it's between 40 to 80% according to the technique developed, from gene panels to whole genome analysis. Of these 60 patients, about half of them can be treated with an appropriate drug. And of these, 50% will respond to treatments. And of these 15 patients, only half of them, in only half of them, the response will be of quality. That means it should be at least a partial remission with a sustained remission. So, as you can see, we are not done. There is a lot to be done, and that's the purpose of this public-private partnership. May I have the next, please? How we can improve? Next, can you advance, please? Yeah. Okay, we can modify these numbers. Probably using whole exome sequencing, whole genome sequencing, and more, and adding all the immunological tests which have been developed this morning during the session, we could reach a number of 90% of the patients where we could find a driver alteration. The coverage, to improve the drug coverage, obviously the pharma industry is very important at this stage, and the collaboration with the academic field is also of outstanding importance. If you want to reach better coverage of all these abnormalities, to reach these numbers of 80 patients. And to know the patients who will respond to treatment, we have also to develop a lot of biomarker of responses, and I will come back afterwards. And for the last point, obviously it's, as you have seen this morning also, it's not enough to have a driver and a drug, and only a part of the population will respond with a sustainable response. And for this, we have to understand that, and the best way to do that is really to improve the data analysis, share the data, have an overview about the outcomes of the treatment, and the big data as developed is a tool that is mandatory to go forward. Just the next slide, please. We, with Charles Sawyers and Gad Getz, have been working on this problem of detecting biomarkers that should predict response. If you want to detect a biomarker of response for a mutation present in 5% of the patients, we must explore, that's a calculation, at least more than 1,000 patients. If 4 drugs are targeting the same pathway, and we expect that there is at least 50 tumor types with the same abnormality, we should have access to the data from 200,000 patients. So that gives you numbers to explore this collaboration between academia and the industry. So my conclusion is that obviously it's not time to stop the effort on genomics. The genomic heterogeneity and the multiplicity of tumor subtypes have been essential discovery in the last 8 years. Obviously, considerable data is available from pharma industry databases and should be shared. And more genomic efforts should define biomarkers to predict response and outcome. And what I can say that the actual cost of the biology around the treatment and the demand from the patients are really compatible to reaching these numbers of 200,000 patients with clinical and genomic data. And that's obviously should be the goals of and the objectives of what we're trying to set up today.
Thank you. If I may so, I will give 2 suggestions or proposal ideas that come to my mind. I think I highly value, and I have to disclose, I am a member of the scientific committee of IMI for the last 4 years. It's a fantastic program, and it's a major, tremendous opportunity for synergy between academia and industry, but also I fully agree with both remarks of Jan and Bettina to involve patients. One of my proposal or topics would be, could we create an IMI which would benefit everybody for a better use of existing resource. So we always speak about cost and price and so, but we already allocate tremendous funds that we know are probably not optimally used. And perhaps it would be a good idea to concentrate on the added value seen by the patient for a better use of existing resource. To my knowledge, this does not exist in partnership with industry and academia and the patient. And the second idea that I have, or that I proposed, is a subject which is very close to my heart. Everybody knows that I am dedicated now mainly to cancer survivorship. And indeed, we have made tremendous progress and a lot of patients are cured, but they are facing numerous societal issues which are not necessarily medical. Some are medical, long-term side effects, pulmonary fibrose, myocardial infarct, and so on, or societal for the bank and insurance. Do they get jobs? Do they get a mortgage, etc. The bottlenecks there, both for the medical part and for the societal part, are long-term surveillance. And usually in all the projects, whether it's the FP6, 7, IMI, the question of sustainability at the end of the project, you do a fantastic project of 4 years, and then it's dropped. You do a fantastic registration trial, you put a drug on the market, but the industry has no incentive to have a follow-up. What are those patients who entered in a registration trial becoming 10, 15 years later? Nobody has such a follow-up. So perhaps we should have the courage to have an IMI partnership and project on long-term effect. But that means 15, 20 years. Politically, I know that it is difficult to set up, to fix, and to put in a framework. But I really think we have to be innovative in that direction. That is my own contribution. But now we give the speech to the floor. Who is? What? Comments, suggestion? Yes.
So with respect to your comment on doing the projects that are most valuable and best use of patients, I was wondering if you thought that some type of targeted concepts for which drugs should be developed for which driver mutations. If you have a 1% incidence driver mutation, it's a very large use of resources, and it benefits a rather small portion of the patient population. So perhaps guidance from the community on which drug opportunities and which mechanisms of action would be most valuable in putting resources to would be very helpful. And I was just wondering what your impression was of that concept.
Yes, but that's always coming back to set up priorities and define what is an added value for the patient. And then your microphone doesn't work. Or speak in it.
Okay, how's that? Okay, and with regards to being able to track, I think the IMI initiatives that are before the SGG on big data and setting up the infrastructure for that will really serve to provide that type of long-term look as to what the outcomes are going to be. I think right now the infrastructure is not really set up to do that, so it becomes very expensive on a trial-by-trial basis to follow up with patients. But if you take a disease state and you create the infrastructure with big data analysis and allow for this analysis to occur in terms of sharing data, that's a very cost-effective way of allowing for long-term look to see which drugs are really effective in the real-world sense. So.
Yes, but the difficulty is that usually the funding who goes with it is handing. So it's a sustainability of database, but also sustainability of funding to pursue this observation in 10 years.
I agree, and I think the sustainability business model is there for big data because there's a lot of value in that for the pharmaceutical companies in terms of life cycle management. So that information provides value all along the continuum of development from discovery to healthcare technology assessments. So I think that once the system is mature, there's an opportunity to take on some of these companies that could act as a management entity for these big data analyses and companies, and they could sell subscriptions, and that would pay for it, and it would be evergreen for those opportunities.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I fully agree with that. Thanks. Yeah, number one, I fully agree that basically patients need to be involved in this IMI project, and that's why we kind of put it up basically as one of the core pillars as part of all projects we want to run. But I would really like to hear from you Bettina, Jan, or whoever, kind of a blue ocean strategy. What kind of IMI project would you like to see launched from a patient perspective? Yeah, certainly for outcomes, but I mean, I'm really meaning concrete. So what kind of project would you want us to do as SGG Oncology, or basically as pharma consortium, which would be really in the view of what you have, what you see, and what you have basically most experience and have the most impact?
I think the critical part right now is actually how we do it. Everyone talks about patient centricity, and I can't hear it anymore. And I just don't believe that having a patient in the room is good enough. And I don't want an extra IMI project for patients. I mean, UPATI as such was a capacity program for us, which was great, and that served our purpose. But I think like just having a patients-only program is not our goal. I think it is more how to incorporate what patients can tell us. I see patients as an enormous resource of information, of knowledge for us as society. Any patient, anyone who's been affected by a serious condition will tell you that that experience was life-altering and that it was something they couldn't have anticipated. Unfortunately, healthy people don't know that. I have, unfortunately, downstairs in my backpack, I think it is Paul Dolan who has done some research into the misconceptions that healthy people have about disease states. So there's even research done into that topic. So I think from a society perspective, patients are the ones who can tell us what the patient really needs. Me as a future patient, I would like to that resource is used, because the day I will be on the other side, I want to be treated according to what I really need, not what I speculate now. Now, for that to happen, and Jan has alluded to that, I think we all have to work on how do we get this patient perspective out of people's heads, because single anecdotes are not going to help us. We have to find a systematic way of understanding what truly matters. And that is a learning process that applies to us. We are working on it, but we have the same discussion with the regulators. We have the same discussions with pharma, with you. So I would like to see a multi-stakeholder effort into really getting into the nitty-gritty of understanding what matters to people. There will be no simple solution. Janus in CML or in melanoma, we are kind of the opposite ends of a cancer spectrum. And what our patients need is very different. And there is no single solution that will please us both, at least not in that context. So it is like, we have to be specific. And I know, well, in every project, there will be disease areas as focus areas. And what we would argue for is then you need to involve people who are specific to that disease area that is discussed. And how do we learn from that? In the end, we will probably, or hopefully, have a methodology how to work with groups, but that group has to be specific. At the moment, how it works is, usually the last work package is the communication and distribution one, 5 or whatever the lowest number is, and the lowest subpoint in the communication patient is patient involvement. And then the budget is already kind of divided up anyway, and then there's space for one person. And no one would come up with the idea that you would want to have one oncologist who is a specialist in everything, or one researcher who does sequencing, bioinformatics, and pathology. But on the patient side, I mean, this sounds totally ridiculous, right? But this is exactly what we get to see as propositions for patient involvement. One specialist for everything. That doesn't work. That's not realistic. So that's the point, I think, where there's potential to evolve. So give me a disease, and then we can help you to find the people, and then we have to work on the methodology.
Maybe just to complement that, I mean, I'm not so proficient like Bettina on the science itself, but looking at what we want to achieve jointly. I mean, you've presented a lot of technologies, new approaches, how to run clinical trials, and we've been discussing. I mean, since I've been in advocacy, we've been discussing about simple things, relatively simple things like Bayesian statistics and new trial designs, and now adaptive pathways and all these kind of new technologies and methods how to run trials and how to get medicines approved later on. But what I see is it's tremendously difficult later on to get these therapies approved. If we think about combination treatments of competing companies with ridiculous pricing that will never give us access, it will, I mean, we can invent a lot of great science, but if it doesn't get to the patient in the end, it will not help us, it will not help anyone. And that's why I think, and that's coming back to IMI, I think that's why the involvement of the regulators and the patient organizations is so important, because we are the ones, both ends, regulators and patients, will in the end be the party that will actually try to push policymakers, try to push reimbursement systems, try to push HTA bodies and so on, to make sure we'll have affordable, let's say, therapies that are based probably on a very different way how we see evidence. And I mean, we've talked about also wasting patients' lives by having the same comparative arm in 5 studies. And I think these things are very welcome, because people are dying in our groups just because of that, because we know that the comparative treatment will actually send half of the people to death in some diseases. We have no interest in that, and I don't think the regulators have an interest. But sometimes it's us getting all the stakeholders together and say, we're not going to leave this room until we've solved the issue and found a way that you're going to accept later on, that the science that we are doing today, we did have developed the data you're going to accept later on. And I think you can only do that with regulators and patients involved. And that's the strength of IMI, I think, not just having competing companies in a consortium with academia, but getting the regulators at some point involved and getting the patient involved from the start. It will transport the outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I mean, this is partially what I wanted to get to. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, one patient having in as a kind of a representative makes not too much sense. There's no question about it. So what I wanted to know is, even IMI has not unlimited resources. I mean, that's very clear. Yeah. So if we want to have 5, 6, 7, whatever projects here, what, from your perspective, would be the most valuable one to do? That's the question I wanted to go. Not so much if we do a patient-centric thing. I mean, patients should be involved in every single project, no matter what it is. And that's definitely what we are committed to. The question is more like, is real-world evidence, in your view, more important than basically doing a more dynamic cancer treatment? Is that more important than understanding tumor microenvironment? Is it more important than understanding new ways of trial designs and things like that? That's what I want to understand a little bit better.
That's a trick question.
Stefan, I think it is possible to actually take a systematic approach for the problems that I have. The first thing for a cancer patient that comes in is that you need to have a good, accurate diagnosis. So what are the kinds of things that you need to do? What is it that is present and what is absent? So I know for sure that in the US, for example, at our institution, every cancer patient that comes in gets a 400 gene panel test. I think Fabian will tell you that that's the kinds of experiments that he does in France. But for example, of all of the European patients, do you get that? And I think the answer we said is no, we do not do that. So a program would be, how can you make it possible for every patient that is diagnosed with cancer to be able to get this accurate, not only pathological diagnosis, but molecular diagnosis? That's one thing that we could think about. All right, once you diagnose the patient, then you need to think about the treatment that's available, right? And so many people don't know what it is that you want to give. Everybody get chemotherapy or whatever the case may be. So how could you provide the information that's available to be accessible to the patients and the physicians about what's the most optimal treatment for that particular patient is? And then you can go on down the line about all of the different sorts of things. And maybe identify what the issues are and then where things are missing. Maybe these are not the most important issues, but that's the way to think about it.
So a brief comment on that. So I personally don't believe there's much value in doing panels for drugs that you later won't have access to. So I would only test for drugs that are actionable. Otherwise you have a nice panel.
That's absolutely not correct. Because one of the things that you know, Bettina, is that there are lots of drugs that are currently in development. You cannot afford to have patients tested 5 different times when a new drug is approved. So if you have the information and if the cost is not significantly greater, you should do that and have that information ready. And if the patient does not respond to whatever the first-line therapy is, this information would help the physician make the choice to do.
But this is still based on the drugs being available and availability being one of our crux points in Europe right now. And there are huge disparities across that. Personally, because you asked what my preference would be, my preference would be actually how do we get most usage out of the innovation that we are currently having? Because there are lots of areas that, and that was alluded to earlier on today, that are not directly in the developing company's interest, because for them it is regulatory approval. But that does not mean that the administration scheme is the best, that the dosage scheme, I mean now in immunotherapies, we're probably overtreating patients. So is that the right doses? Is that the right scheme? Can we space it? How do we combine it? How do we sequence it? And I believe that as society, the society value in that is huge. So that would be my personal, so that we get more of what we currently have in our hands and learn how to better use it. And that also alludes like that we follow patients through the different treatment stages. Immunotherapies behave differently than any other drugs we had in the past. You have it once in your system, you will have a long-term effect of it. So we have to kind of learn how to deal with that type of information. So that would be mine.
I mean, it's quite difficult for me to prioritize, but I would say this kind of the dynamic cancer treatment is extremely important because it happens already out there in the world, but we don't have a system to know how it works. Because, I mean, people are hopping from therapy to therapy, but we're switching them in the moment when we detect the resistance with the traditional methods we have at the moment. And I mean, at that point, we know in cancer that the earlier you treat, the better. Once you have progress, it's going to be very difficult to get that at bay. So having something like you presented in the morning where we would really assess early, try to predict resistance, try to intervene early, not to look at organs, but look at biomarkers and putting that all into kind of basket. I think this would be great progress for many of the cancers just because they don't follow a pathway. Lung cancer doesn't exist anymore.
Just on that topic, because I remember your slides from the morning, resistance is, of course, especially resistant targeted therapy, is a huge topic. I believe that we're currently focusing too much on breaking resistance once it's established. I think that intervening before it is too late is a big window of opportunity. And we know, well, I'm a melanoma, so there is a window where you have a reversible acquired resistance. So not a primary resistance, but a gradual acquisition of resistance over time. And we know that a treatment break can reverse this resistance. So there must be some kind of intermediate process, probably epigenetic regulated, because this is unlikely to be a genetic event, that I think is a huge window of opportunity, and that does not only apply to melanoma, to other targeted therapies as well. And if you link this up now with tumor evolution concepts, and we talked about it, if you look at Charlie Swanton's work on that, and what type of mutational load, in my opinion, is too narrow, because it has to be, well, just the load is not sufficient, because the studies he's shown is whether just a stem or branch mutation has an effect on how well the immune system reacts upon it. So I think that would be an area of interest where we could basically find a window of opportunity that would help our patients.
Thomas Schlange from Bayer, and I'm coordinating an IMI project called Cancer ID. And actually I would like to take up a citation, an Asian citation already. We need a phone number, basically, because it turned out to be very difficult to find the right people, to identify the right people. We are active in breast cancer and lung cancer, and to keep the ones we identified on board, basically, and active. It was about a position in the scientific advisory board, first of all, but we tried to do this involvement really early on when we wrote the proposal, basically, and we had similar troubles with the regulators, actually, but we managed to cope with that, and both FDA and EMA were now basically giving us support here. And for the patient organizations, it's really difficult from industry at the stage when we want to write a proposal to reach out to the right people who are responsive. That's one thing. The other thing is about sustainability, also in the interaction with patients, but also in a broader sense. We had this question whether there's a possibility for European NCI. I think we need that, irrespective whether it's based in Liechtenstein or anywhere else. But I think this is something that would offer the opportunity to keep up things from projects that run out, that have to run out at some point, and to involve other stakeholders, let it be regulators, patients, at a really constant basis in all the projects and development programs. So I think we need to put more effort in that to really stabilize this. Because basically the questions we are discussing right now, let it be patient-centristic approaches, regulatory challenges. We had a meeting 3 weeks ago in Brussels on that as well. everybody knows the problems, but we need a forum where this is really moved forward.
Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can probably comment. I don't know how you recruited the patients. I understand that you had people actually leaving the advisory board or not turning up, right? And I mean, this is basically an issue. I mean, it is changing at the moment because we are professionalizing on our side. I mean, we have 98 patient experts on the EU-Party training course. 50 have graduated. The other ones are in training at the moment, are graduating in December. Which means we're increasing the number of proficient patient advocates that really understand R&D while they're themselves patients or have been patient advocates for many years. And they, as a knock-on effect, train people in their own community. So today, when you start a project today, it's much easier to find a patient advocate who knows that and probably also has an alternate, because we need to see, I mean, breast cancer is quite good, but in some diseases our patients are dying, so it's quite unlikely they're going to give you advice for 5 years. Unfortunately, that's still a lot in the case in oncology. But I mean, what we've done, we've set up a network of the 20 cancer patient umbrella organizations informally last year to connect the leaders. And we are trying to channel these kind of things and trying to identify people. And I think from that side, we're improving the processes, how we can identify people that can contribute to projects like these. There are two things that I can give as advice. First, give us time. Quite often, I mean, I've received, for example, the proposal to join an IMI project this week on Monday, and the deadline is today. I should, by tonight, actually fill out all the forms and should join. I haven't even read the proposal. This is not the way it's going to work, because I've been sitting here for the last 2 days. So time is an issue. And also, when you think about involvement, plan early, because usually patient advocates have a normal job, not in advocacy, so they can't turn up next week to a meeting. And I see that too often, and that's why I usually turn down a lot of projects that my organization would actually be interested in if I had time to find someone. And the second one is provide a budget, not only travel costs, because we have very little people that understand research and development enough. But these people either have a normal job, but if we want to give them a perspective to act as people that work on your projects and really contribute, we need a budget for them, and we need to pay them, and we need to give them a reason to leave their normal job somewhere in another industry to be full-time advocates, because otherwise they cannot afford to provide input into 5 different committees and projects. So think about budgeting, and don't think about a couple of €1,000, which is then sufficient for 5 years. You need to give them the opportunity. If they're not doing the advocacy work anymore because they're working on your project, they probably need to have the money to recruit someone doing their work in advocacy. And so think about the budgeting side as well. And I think IMI has mechanisms to do that. We've seen it in EU-Party that it worked also with people that worked as contractors and consultants to the patient organizations, advocates that had a disease, but they were not employed, but they contributed over 4 or 5 years now to the project. And this works, but it needs planning. And I think we've learned a lot from EU-Party, which we can share.
Just what to add on to that, I think it is important to have a profile what you're looking after, because at the moment I think it's just lack of experience on either side, but no one really knows what type of person would be the ideal person to fill the spot. And I think it would help, even if it's a rough draft and get reworked, but it's a starting point. What are you especially looking for? And then we can try to identify that person. But it also helps the advocacy community saying, this is what is required. We want people who have technical knowledge, either because they have a degree in that field or because they have been to training courses like EU-Party. It would really, really help, and it will make the interaction constructive. Otherwise, it's just ticking, and I think no one is helped by that.
And maybe just, sorry for talking so much, but just to add to that, it's a very important point that Bettina is making. You're all talking about patients, but patients is a difficult term that has been established for patient involvement, because patients can be patients in their individual interest with a disease experience, but nothing else. Patients can be patient advocates that are representing a full group of patients and are supporting them on a day-to-day basis, either direct support or research or whatever. When you have patient advocacy experts, those are the ones that went to the EU-Party training or did other kind of trainings or have been in advocacy for 10, 15 years like myself, that have been working with so many people that they know what they're doing. So it depends what you want, what kind of profile you want. And with the European Society of Medical Oncology, where Bettina chairs the patient advocacy work group, we have established these 3 levels, and we're trying to integrate patients on 3 different levels. And your project might want a breast cancer with triple negative breast cancer from their own patient experience, or you want someone who understands what's going on in breast cancer research. Completely different profiles, completely different advocates that we're going to provide you for that.